Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my weekly cult situation report. I'm Daniella, scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership. I grew up in the religious cult, the Children of God, 3 generations in, and got myself thrown out when I was 15. Then I went to college. Then I joined the US Army and went to war a couple times. I wrote this book, Uncultured, all about it. You can get signed copies attached here. I just finished writing my second book, The Culting of America. And I'm so excited to share some updates with you at the end if you have been following this 2.5 year saga of getting this book done. So stay tuned. I have a master's degree in organizational psychology. And now I knit and talk to the internet about cults and tyrants and bad guys. And it has been a fascinating ride, especially since the election. It's a wild time to be an expert on the bad guys. So, one thing I have to say is like, if I'm talking about it, it's bad. People hear me saying the military is not going to turn their weapons on you, martial law is not logistically possible at a national level in the United States, and think I'm saying like everything's fine or it could never happen here. I'm not saying those things. I I'm a cult scholar and I'm talking about the president of the United States. It's bad. It's bad. So, I just want to say up front like I called this in 2015 and said this is going to be really bad. He's going to try to be a tyrant and a dictator, and I changed my whole life so that I could like do this work on a daily basis. And now part of what I do is I show up every day and do my threat briefs and talk about what is going on, just like the intelligence officer should do. Sometimes we talk about how dangerous it could get, but you don't spend all of your time in the most dangerous course of action. You have to spend most of your time in the most likely. And the reality is, Donald Trump has a 98% failure rate with his EOs in court right now. He has an A plus 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 in failing. They're throwing everything at the wall. This was the approach that Steve Bannon told them to use the last time. Right? He used last time to get rid of a bunch of obstacles in his way and put the Supreme Court in place that he wanted. And now he's just throwing everything at the wall. And I'm telling y'all, he wants to be a dictator. He wants to be a full on tyrant. You do not have to convince me of that. But you, civilians don't understand the military, and most people don't really understand our government too well. And there's this thing in cults called routinization, right? So when a cult leader gets into power, gets his thing built, no cult leader runs their cult by themselves unless it's a 1-1 cult, right? So you have to have your leadership structure in place. And you can do one of two things. You can surround yourself with effective bureaucrats, but then they start bureaucrating. They start writing things down. They start building processes. They start creating systems of influence and systems of control, as Dr. Janja Lalich calls them. But bureaucracy is the opposite of charismatic leadership from the point of you can just grab it and steer however you want, right? So that's not usually who a cult leader surrounds himself with. Usually, who a cult leader surrounds himself with is fellow narcissists who have affirmed him on his rise to power, right? But then there's a problem. Because then the cult leader has to keep them off balance all of the time, right? He has to keep moving them around. He has to keep engaging in come here, go away behavior, being nice to you sometimes and being wildly mean to you at other times. So you never know what you're going to get with him. And he has to do rounds of firing and getting rid of his key lieutenants. I think the only lieutenants that our cult leader never got rid of were my father and grandfather, and they were the ones that handled the money. So, there's all kinds of stuff going on. But Mike Walls being removed, right? They're not tying it to Signalgate. They're giving him another post. but moving his people around is what we expect to see. And I expect to see a lot more turnover now that he's kind of gotten through his first crazy 100 days. In the worst coincidence that I can think of right now, Donald Trump's birthday coincides with the 250th anniversary of the United States Army. So, where before I said that logistically there was no way he was getting a parade for his birthday, I think he might. Obviously, there have been things planned in the works for the celebration of the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army, and I know he will show up and make it all about him. And I just want to remind you that if you're celebrating your leader's birthday, you might be in a cult. He also wrote an EO today about downsizing the military, and while yes, it's scary, I think it's confirmation that he knows the military will not be on his side for the things he's going to try to do. And I think he's trying to be a tyrant and a dictator. I also remind you that we've just left a 20-year war, and downsizing the military is unfortunately quite appropriate right now. So there you have that. RFK Jr. talking about 300,000 children trafficked under the Biden administration who are now missing. This obviously is just another conspiracy theory that has been discredited many times. And you know what? Every time it's do it for the children, it's a distraction. Nobody cares about children in this country. But this is very similar. The children being sex trafficked by the deep state and the cabal and all of that was wrapped up in QAnon. Like, this is just the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s over again. And what that was human beings getting access to the information age and finding out in real time just how common it was for children to be abused by their friends, by their family, by their religious leaders. And it was easier for parents to tell themselves that there were satanic cults going around kidnapping children, drinking their blood. There was a lot of anti-Semitism in it. It was a lot of just racism and garbage. The satanic panic, by the way, has been proven not to be true. Over 1,200 cases were investigated and not one single piece of evidence was found. That's why we call it the satanic panic, not survivors of X satanic cult. Okay, no matter what Teal Swan says. But this is also a good opportunity to talk about the demand for child labor, not just fake missing children, because all cults are about labor. And I'm actually editing that chapter of the book right now, which I think is the most important one. And as I go through all these different groups and things and how they traffic children, it's always like, especially the children. Cults are always about labor, especially the children. Cults are always about labor, especially the children. And it was predictable, and I said that we were going to see the rolling back of child labor laws in some places. And it's already happening in Florida. Florida has just made it legal for 14-year-olds to enter the workforce and to work overnight in factories. In agriculture, it's legal for 12-year-olds to work in fields, especially if they're brown. I actually take on 4 different industries specifically that are bad for trafficking, which is childcare, agriculture, performance, and restaurants that have a lot of child trafficking. And cults are always about labor, which means they are criminal enterprises. And by the way, if you ever want to go after the cult that did it to you, I suggest going after trafficking and not other kinds of abuses. Okay, some representative made some fear porn video saying they just agreed to deport Americans. Stop right there. First of all, it's not deporting if they're American citizens. It's kidnapping them and sending them abroad, which is illegal in about 14 different ways. And they didn't make it a law. If it gets out of committee, then it has to pass the House. Then it has to pass the Senate, including the filibuster. Right? Like, then it's not going to get out of courts. You can't deport American citizens. Deport means sending someone back to their country of origin. This is our country of origin. Do we need to be watching this very closely? Absolutely. Do we need to be screaming at all of our representatives? Absolutely. But we do not need to be flying around in a panic saying that they just made it legal to deport American citizens. Let's keep our eyes on the American citizens they've already deported and keep screaming about getting them back and making our representatives care. The other thing I keep hearing is the Heritage Foundation says they're 41% complete. Stop it. Of course they do. Of course they want you to think they're successful. And I want to talk about when we were in Afghanistan, I was a intelligence officer for a helicopter unit. And every single time a helicopter fell out of the sky for any reason, often because it just ran out of gas, which was so surprisingly common for our helicopters, and I still don't understand it to this day. Anyway, as the intelligence team, almost never was it the Taliban or the insurgents that we were fighting who took down the helicopters in Afghanistan. Sometimes, but rarely, right? Usually it was something else. Pilot error, they need to go down for a little bit, mechanical error, etc. But helicopter coming down and landing in an emergency is conspicuous. So every single time it happened, the Taliban would loudly take credit for it. And so then we knew that like bad stuff was going to happen more. There was going to be more bang bang and pew pew when people went on patrol, right? Because they're keeping their people striving and like riled up and thinking that they're having all this success. He's having a 98% failure rate in the court. It's propaganda, what the Heritage Foundation is saying. It's propaganda. Don't fall for it. Oh, Pete Hegseth shilling for the feminists is not what I had on my 2025 bingo card. But he finally made physical standards for combat arm branches the same, which is what all of us women who have touched that have been asking them to do for generations. Okay, so here's the thing. A bunch of men decided that you have to be this level of physical fit to be in the Army across the board with no relation to what your job is, which is silly already. Okay? Then they wrote down what they decided was how fit you had to be. Then they said, well, if you're a man, you have to be this fit. And if you're a woman, you have to be this fit. Right? They didn't test any of these things. This wasn't like carefully done. This is very random. Okay? And if you ask any male soldier if the physical fitness test that they do has anything to do with their job in the military, they will laugh at you and they will tell you all the ways it's ridiculous. But then you ask them if you think women could be in combat or could do whatever, then they're immediately, the standards are so important. The thing is so important. Standards, just like professionalism, standards is the military's version of professionalism. And it is almost always used to police to maintain the status quo and to police people's behavior. And the status quo is racist and sexist and terrible. Anyway, so then men wrote that down and then they used that as an excuse why women couldn't be in combat because they said we couldn't do the same things. Here's the thing. We've been out doing men this whole time. You could read about it in Uncultured, where I'm one of the first women on a deliberate ground combat team. And basically the first thing I have to do to prove myself to them is I have to race a bunch of them. And I'm racing in all of my gear. And they are running slick in their physical fitness clothes and tennis shoes. And I beat most of them. Women who go into combat arms been beating these bros for a long time. And we have been saying, they're always like, oh, fine, you want to be equal? Equal standards then. And we have been saying, bring it. And they finally brung it. They finally found their man pearls, clutched them hard enough, and brought it. And I cannot wait. Because you see, before, they had protection against being just physically beaten by women. Because they could be like, oh no, it's different standards. And when I would beat them on their standards, they would be like, oh, but it doesn't matter because you're a woman. You only have to do the fitness. And ha! Finally, Pete Hegseth, first good thing you've done. And I cannot wait. Active duty ladies, please have fun with this and please film it. Please just like smash these guys and then throw it in their faces and then get videos of them clutching their man pearls and crying and put them on the internet and share them with us all. Please. Thank you. Male fragility. It's just so fragile. Okay. Oh, what else do I have on this list? Oh, someone asked me to rank the branches from. They said least culty to most culty, but I did it the other way. It confused everybody. Anyways, it is very obviously Marines, Army, Navy, Air Force. That is the same order in which they are dangerous to women. The Coast Guard, I think, is probably the least culty. It's not always part of the Department of Defense. It's part of the Department of Homeland Security, but it can be part of the Department of Defense and it's still kind of part of the military. Least culty for sure, and I definitely think safest for women. The Space Force is still a startup. It's still jumping around, like figuring out where it's going to be and how culty it's going to be. But so far, I'm hearing less culty, which makes sense. Just like aviation was less culty than infantry, because when your skills are highly technical, you have to respect each other. It just, rank matters less. Rank matters less when that person is the one who's driving you, or that person is the one who's controlling your intelligence, or that person's the crew chief that needs to fix your helicopter when you're down outside the wire. And so the Air Force is the least culty in part because of how technical they are. So that would make sense for the Space Force. All right, Culting of America. That's my big update. My big update is that Culting of America has a due date. This project that I have been working on for what I thought was 2.5 years, but now that I see the bibliography that is 35 pages long, I'm like, oh no, this was a 5-year research project. All the stuff I read before I was ready to write the book, and then now. The due date is January 20th, 2026, 1-year anniversary of us all living in a cult together. And I will be having some kind of book event in DC that I will let you all know about. We will make lots of jokes about crowd size. I'm very, very excited. I actually have now like all the chapters back from the editor / co-writer, and it's looking really, really good. And I have until May 15th to get everything finalized. And I also need to send a copy to the Pentagon because, if you've ever worked for the Department of Defense and you're writing anything to do with the military, even fiction, you have to send it to the Pentagon for review, for secrets, not for if they like it. And if you're wondering if this means someday Knitting Cult Lady is going to write feminist military erotica just for the purpose of sending it to the Pentagon and forcing them to have to read it, yes, she is. Okay. So now that I have all the chapters back and I'm doing my final edits, I'm also going to be recording them. I'm making my video book. So if you are a Patreon member, that is one of the benefits. You will get to hear every single part of this book well before it comes out. So check out Patreon if you are interested. I've also decided that I'm going to be releasing the book in Spanish and in Portuguese, at least digitally and on audio. And we'll see about print, which also means I'm doing some more Spanish content and reading snippets of the book out in Spanish and Portuguese. So stay tuned for that if you're a Spanish or Portuguese speaker, or maybe your loved ones are and don't speak English. And finally, for some nitpicking. Okay, so first of all, this shirt, these are granny square that I hardened with epoxy. This shirt was actually supposed to be my dress for Mr. Knitting Cult Lady's retirement party, and the skirt was going to be like a tulle underskirt with crochet over it, so still kind of being like 1950s but with FU brightness. Then COVID said hold my beer, so it just became a little cropped up. Okay, this is the first part of my Carmen San Diego outfit. I'm going to be a psychological operation. So this is the vest. I'm still, I think, going to put some red fur around it here. There's going to be a detachable skirt cape and then a big red Panama hat with a lot of very Latin. I think I'm going to take this opportunity to teach myself freestyle crochet on top of the hat, and then an LED light that says not a psyop. And if any of you know where I can get a small custom LED light that I can attach to a hat, please drop the link. That would be so great. This new thing I invented called a zip again. I think I showed you one last week. So this one I made for me. And the sleeve being a different color, I think is just always going to be kind of the signature thing as I make more of these because it looks so great. Right? This one I didn't make this week, but I was wearing it this week and people were gassed. So this is a sari scarf that I cut up and woo, it's all tangled. Oh no. Okay. So took this scarf. I made very fun sleeves, and then it's got this drape in the back, so I didn't have to cut the scarf, but it also works as a hood. It's very kind of like dressy, fancy. Of course, I mostly wear it on my couch to talk to you all. And last but not least, I've begun to make earrings out of tassels. They're called fringe belief earrings, and most of them are out now getting photographed so that I can sell some. These are the luggage tag fringe belief. I think they look like things that go on purses or bags, but then I just made them earrings, and they are bala. All right, thanks for hanging out with me today. See you next week on the Cult Situation Report, where I talk about everything that happened in the world of cults and everything that happened in my world of cults.